Hello. I haven't listened to the whole speech. I've just heard clips of it. And the clips I heard were of such insincerity that I really didn't want to see the whole thing. But I'm doing it now. I've got up the courage and I'm going to try reacting to Keir Starmer's speech and perhaps analysing a little what he says. I'm Granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. Okay, let's get on with it.
The senseless, barbaric murder of 3 young girls in Southport is a devastating moment in our history.
This has happened before. We've had murders in our history. As horrible as it is, it's no different from other awful murders, like the one in the Manchester Arena, for instance, which did away with far more than 3 innocent little girls and a lot of other people as well. No, the devastating moment that Starmer is contemplating is the fact that it has brought up in very sharp focus the problems of immigration and integration in our country and the second-class citizenship of many of the white working class people who knew there was something wrong and were slapped down very firmly for even bringing the subject up.
No words come anywhere close to expressing the brutality and horror in this case.
Yeah, that's true.
Every parent in Britain will have had the same thought. It could have been anywhere. It could have been our children.
And in many cases, it was. I refer you to the Westminster Bridge attack, for instance. I'm just going through odd things that are occurring to me as I'm listening to this. I'm sure that the viewers will see many more.
But it was Southport. It was Bibi, 6 years old. Elsie, 7. Alice, 9. Back in August, I said there would be a time for questions, but that first justice had to be done.
The time for questions was then. There is no time for questions. When you have a question, you should be allowed to ask it straight away. And justice was not done. There were many people who got, as he said, the full force of the law, but they didn't get justice because they were asking questions that he didn't want asked at that particular time.
And that above all, we must not interfere with the work of the police.
The Home Office issued a tweet saying all the people who are arrested will be sentenced or something like that. That was under the umbrella that the Home Office, but that was Yvette Cooper. That is the assumption that everybody who was arrested was guilty. And he's talking now about not interfering with the work of the police. Well, one law for some and one law for others.
The prosecutors and the delivery of that justice. Well, yesterday, thankfully, a measure of justice was done.
No, justice hasn't been done. And because Axel Rudakapana has pleaded guilty, a lot of questions will not be answered in court now. The whole thing has gone through, quietly. And although he may say, well, we're going to ask questions later on, there will be things that will not come up. I made a short recently. One of the questions was, who radicalised this kid? They're not talking about that. They're talking about Prevent and the social services and the police. So there's a lot that will not come up now. And the problem is, I have a question, of course. And the question is, was this kid pressured into pleading guilty? Instead of, as I expect his defence team to say that he's not guilty, but certifiably mad. And then you have to ask, who took on a mad person and turned him into a jihadi? It looks like that's what he was. But again, we're not getting any answers to that. And I'm not sure we ever will. Now he's pleaded guilty.
But it won't bring those girls back to their families.
Oh, no. So, yeah, let's just keep quiet because it won't bring those poor kids back. And it won't relieve the pain of their parents' grief. No. So we shouldn't ask questions too much, Just stay polite about it.
And it won't remove the trauma from the lives of those who were injured. Their lives will never be the same.
And I might say, the lives of all the people who turned up after the massacre and were arrested for holding posters or making irrational Facebook posts. Their lives won't be the same either. And that's down to you, Sir Keir.
So before I turn to the questions that must now be answered...
No, it may be the questions that you are going to answer. Not the ones that must be answered, though.
The families and the nation. I first want to recognise their unimaginable grief, because I know the whole country grieves for them. The tragedy of the Southport killings must be a line in the sand for Britain. We must make sure the names of those 3 young girls are not associated with the vile perpetrator, but instead with a fundamental change in how Britain protects its citizens and its children.
Well, this could be a fundamental change in our immigration policies, couldn't it, Sir Keir?
In pursuit of that, we must, of course, ask and answer difficult questions.
Yeah, that'll be the day.
Questions that should be far-reaching, unburdened by cultural or institutional sensitivities.
No, he talks about this. The tone of his voice, the preachy tone, it's dripping with insincerity. Is he going to come out and say, a Muslim did this, and a mad Muslim to boot? And how did he become a Muslim when his family were Christian? How did a kid on the edge slip through that net? How did that happen?
And driven only by the pursuit of justice. That is what we owe the families. The responsibility for this barbaric act lies, as it always does, with the vile individual who carried it out. But
yes, of course it does. But it also rests with the people who facilitated him doing that. You may say a gun has shot somebody. You've got to worry about who pulled the trigger.
That is no comfort. And more importantly, use. And so, as part of the inquiry launched by the Home Secretary yesterday, I will not let any institution of the state deflect from their failure.
Yeah. Did you hear that? I will not let any institution of the state deflect from their failure. But what about other institutions? For instance, the institution that might have radicalised this young man. If, as Tommy Robinson says, he does attend mosque and he did convert, then somebody must have converted him. That's an institution you should be looking at as well. But he's slipping sideways on that one, isn't he?
Failure which, in this case, frankly, leaps off the page. For example, the perpetrator was referred to the Prevent programme on 3 separate occasions. In 2019, once, and in 2021, twice. Yet on each of these occasions, a judgment was made that he did not meet the threshold for intervention, a judgment that was clearly wrong and which failed those families. And I acknowledge that here today. Throughout this case, to this point,
he has no responsibility for Prevent, so he finds it really easy to blame them. There are other things for which he is blameworthy, but he's not talking about those.
We have only been focused on justice. If this trial had collapsed because I or anyone else had revealed crucial details.
The mugshots of the people in the Southport riots, they were up on the internet within hours, seconds of them being arrested. The actual arrests were videoed and out on the internet. But that's all right. Rudakabana, he was a mystery. All you saw was a fresh-faced kid. The mugshot of that evil face, that wasn't released. A whole lot of stuff was suppressed. And that's why there were riots. He's not taking responsibility for that, nor for the shattered lives of the people who found themselves whipped up in this fury at what had happened, that was made even worse by his hiding of the circumstances and the people involved. He's not accepting responsibility for that, though, is he?
While the police were investigating, while the case was being built, while we were awaiting a verdict, then the vile individual who committed these crimes would have walked away a free man.
That's a load of bollocks. Absolute taradiddle.
The prospect of justice destroyed.
Here you see a man justifying his bad behaviour. I mean, if you, in every aspect of his body language and the tone of his voice, it's one lie after the other, one justification. It's like some wife beater justifying his lack of self-control because his wife didn't get his dinner on the table. If she'd have only got the dinner on the table at 5 o'clock exactly, then everything would have been all right and life would have been marvellous. I mean, it's the same feel. This speech has the same feel to it. Well, to me anyway.
For the victims and their families. I would never do that. And nobody would ever forgive me if I had. That is why the law of this country forbade me or anyone else from disclosing details sooner.
That's rubbish. Details come out really quickly all the time. What do you mean? The fact that he was 17 turned 18 during the investigation of the crime. Well, there are still things coming out of what he did during his attack on those girls, which I can't say because I don't have confirmation. And this is the whole point. I have heard he was shouting some Muslim mantra while he was doing what he was doing, but I can't confirm that. I don't know. This is total rubbish.
Nonetheless, it is now time for those questions.
No, the only reason it's time for those questions is because you absolutely cannot avoid it right now.
And the first of those is whether this was a terrorist attack. The blunt truth here is that this case is a sign. Britain now faces a new threat. Terrorism has changed. In the past, the predominant threat was highly organised groups.
This is rubbish. There was a lone wolf Islamist who went into a park and killed 3 gay men out, just enjoying the sun. There's a fellow who killed David Amis, the MP. He was another lone wolf. And then there was the guy in the Manchester bombing, of course. And the Westminster Bridge, that was just a single person as well, so far as I remember. I know the other 3 were for sure. No, this has been going on for a while. There's nothing new about it. So pretending you had to be quiet because it was something new, yeah, all right, you know what I think about that.
Clear political intent. Groups like Al-Qaeda. That threat, of course, remains. But now, alongside that, we also see acts of extreme violence perpetrated by loners, misfits, young men in their bedroom.
Just a minute. They aren't in their bedrooms. They're out there with their bombs and their knives. And you notice, loners, misfits, Muslims. I'm sorry, Muslims. I can think of only one attack which was not done by a Muslim, and that was the Joe Cox murder. The rest have been Muslims, Muslim radicalism. But this is something he's not going to say, is he? So he's talking about vile murder and tragedy of families and all the rest of it. And that means, I've got a heart. But you don't have a head for the truth, do you?
Accessing all manner of material online. Desperate.
Yeah. Al-Qaeda material online. Muslims, I'm sorry to say that. And that's because in many mosques in this country, Raja Mir was saying he used to go, or he still goes, to a small sort of domestic mosque in his neighbourhood. But there's a huge mosque that's been built. It's full of radicals spewing hatred. That's what's causing it. Why don't those words come out of your mouth, Sir Keir?
For notoriety. Sometimes inspired by traditional terrorist groups, but fixated on that extreme violence, seemingly for its own sake.
No! For its own seemingly, he is a lawyer. He's got all the right words in all the right places. It's not seemingly for its own sake. It is for the sake of jihad. The idea is that the kuffar shall feel insecure and threatened, whatever they're doing, whatever holidays they're celebrating, whatever fun they're having. They always should be looking over their shoulder at resurgent Islam. That's what's going on.
Now, it may well be that people like this are harder to spot. But we can't shrug our shoulders and accept that.
You will, as long as you are not naming the nature of the threat. He is talking cloud. We want reality. And that reality is that this is Islam. And he talks about far-right thugs who have done nothing at all, even close to what Muslims have done in this country recently. And he's talking about people not being able to shrug their shoulders.
We can't have a national security system that fails to tackle people who are a danger to our values, our security, our children.
Oh, yeah, our children. Oh, yes. Then name the problem. You can't solve a problem until you've identified it.
We have to be ready to face every threat. And when I look through the details of this case, the extreme nature of the violence, the meticulous plan to attack young children in a place of joy and safety, violence clearly intended to terrorise, then I understand why people wonder what the word terrorism means.
No, nobody wonders what the word terrorism means. We all know what it means. What you're wondering about is how to not say that at the moment the terrorism is Muslim terrorism, and we have to face that.
And so if the law needs to change to recognise this new and dangerous threat, then we will change it. And quickly.
Yeah. I'll bet you anything that law will be talking about far-right thugs. How much do you want to bet that the law will be talking, and he will be talking, and Yvette Cooper will be talking about far-right thugs?
And we will also review our entire counter-extremist system to make sure we have what we need to defeat it. Now, that work is already underway. I've tasked...
What sort of a word is that? I've given the job to...
David Anderson Casey, the new independent Prevent Commissioner, to hold this system to account.
Oh, here we are. Look, this is a marvellous example of cut and paste talk. To hold this system to account, that's one, yeah. And then to shine a light, I wonder what the next one's going to be.
To shine a light into its darkest corners.
Into its darkest corners, yeah. So, OK, well, that's two cut and paste. There aren't any more for the moment.
So the British people can have confidence that action will follow work.
Yeah, well, I don't have any confidence in anything he's saying so far. First of all, because of the slimy, faux sincere, as Michael Flanders said, yeah, sincerity, when you can fake that, you've got it made. The faux sincere tone of his voice, and the fact that he is not naming the nature of the problem. And the fact that he's using words like tusked, which make it sound so important. Yeah, I wonder how far this guy is going to get if he starts actually naming what's happening.
But I have to say, to face up to this new threat...
Oh, by the way, that's threat, not thread.
There are also bigger questions. Questions such as how we protect our children from the tidal wave of violence freely available online.
So now we are going to have internet censorship. All of this was aimed towards the idea of clamping down on free speech. That is all it's ever been about. A tidal wave of violence on the internet has been there for years, and kids will get round it with VPNs and all sorts of things. So all he's talking about is the idea of prosecuting people if they actually admit that they've seen something that his government doesn't like.
Because you can't tell me that the material this individual viewed before committing these murders should be accessible.
Do you notice how he says this individual without naming him? Don't you find that interesting?
On mainstream social media platforms, that with just a few clicks, people can watch video after horrific video. Videos that in some cases are never taken down.
This is the whole purpose of this. So all that stuff about vile, awful person and wonderful children and tragedy and grief of the parents and all the rest of it, it's all been leading to this censorship.
No, that cannot be right. But it's not just the nightmares of the online world. Because when you wake from a nightmare, the first thing you do is reassure yourself with reality. But for far too many people, the state of our society no longer does that.
Oh, well, maybe that's because the police are arresting the wrong people. That is a nightmare. That a man who's been jailed for a civil offence, Tommy Robinson, is in solitary confinement in one of the highest security prisons in the land. That's a nightmare.
Now, people will say this is all because of immigration.
Oh, yeah, people will, won't they?
All because of funding cuts.
It's nothing to do with funding cuts. It's to do with the police going after the wrong people most of the time. It's to do with people like you, Sir Keir, talking about right-wing, far-right thugs or whatever. Instead of talking about the far-right in the more fanatically religious parts of this country. That's what's wrong.
But in truth, neither tells us...
What do you know about truth? What do you know about truth? Horrible little man.
Anything like the full story, or explains this case properly. No.
You see, it's not the fact that Antoine, I think his first name is Antoine, Rudakabana immigrated here. He seems like somebody who's kept his head down and not done anything particularly unpleasant to this country. And he had a son, obvious, I mean, that lad should be in Broadmoor for the rest of his life. It seems to me. That's obvious. The problem is that boy who was brought up originally a Christian got radicalised somehow. That's what the problem is. And who radicalised him? And how was he allowed to radicalise him? That's the problem.
This goes deeper. A growing sense that the rights and responsibilities that we owe to one another, the set of unwritten rules that hold a nation together.
Yeah. One of the unwritten rules, Sir Keir, is that you don't look at a bunch of people who have just had the heart ripped out of their community and the sacrifice of 3 little girls and the injuries of many more and call them all right-wing thugs. No, sorry, far-right thugs. That's an unwritten rule in this society as well.
have in recent years been ripped apart. Children who've stopped going to school since the pandemic. Young people who've opted out of work or education. More and more people...
He's starting to sound like that old guy at the pub, isn't he? Who's complaining about a whole load of things. No, you are not here to talk about people unemployed. Unemployed because there are no jobs for them because of immigration. But let's put that on one side for a moment. You are just bringing a whole load of things in as if this bolsters your argument. Well, you are using it, pads out your argument anyway.
Retreating into parallel lives, whether through failures of integration or just a country slowly turning away from itself.
Well, yeah, because you are turning away from us. You are the one who's trying to absorb us back into the EU, aren't you, Sir Keir? You are the one who calls ordinary people far-right thugs, Sir Keir. You are the one who won't talk about the dangers of radical Islam. You are the one whose government has thrown people in jail for being angry. And now it looks like you are the one who's going to be finding other ways to throw people in jail. Oh, and you also released a lot of violent criminals as well, in order to make room for the people who just said things on Facebook or Instagram or wherever. And you can wonder why people are losing faith in our political system.
That politics, for all that it may have contributed, must try to heal.
Oh, yes! You really tried to heal, didn't you? Good grief! Are you really that stupid?
Thirdly, there are also questions about the accountability of the Whitehall and Westminster system, a system that is far too often driven by circling the institutional wagons.
Well, do you know, that's the first time he's said anything true in this whole thing. Well, no, I think it may be the second time. Yeah, your first instinct was to circle the wagons, wasn't it? But are you saying, my party, my bad for that? No, he's talking generally. He is not accepting the responsibility for the mess he's made of governance in the past few months, right from the very beginning of his takeover of British politics.
That does not react until justice is either hard won by campaigners or until appalling tragedies like this.
Oh, yeah. So we're going to go back to censorship now, aren't we? We're going to be proactive. We'll stop people talking about nasty things on the internet, won't we? So we were right to imprison those people. And we're going to make it even harsher. Of course, the people who are really coming up with the nasties, they're outside the country. They're in Pakistan and Afghanistan and Iran. And they are being accessed through VPNs. There is absolutely nothing you can do to stop them. But what you can do is stop ordinary people, probably like me, from speaking out about it.
A degree of action. Time and again, we see this pattern. And people are right to be angry about it. I'm angry about it.
Yeah.
Southport must be a line in the sand.
Oh, there's another nice cliche.
So nothing will be off the table in this inquiry. Nothing. And most importantly...
No, I don't believe that. I absolutely don't believe that.
It will lead to change. I know people will be watching right now and they'll be saying, We've heard all this before.
Oh, yes, we have. That's when you're not insulting the native British people, of course. They're the answer to all your problems. You can blame everything on them.
The promises, the sorrow, the inquiry that comes and goes, an inability to change that, frankly, has become the oxygen of wider conspiracy. And we've seen that.
Yeah, so conspiracy, rather than actually seeing what's going on. It's not conspiracy when it's true. He didn't say conspiracy theories. He's chosen his words very carefully. I have to give him that. It sounds good until you actually start thinking about it.
Throughout this case, a suggestion that there has been a cover-up.
There is a cover-up. I've pointed out at least one question I've come up with that I know isn't going to get answered. That is, who radicalised this kid? What mosque was it? And are the people responsible for his radicalisation going to be booted out of the country? That is always assuming he was converted. As I said, he does attend mosque. So it's an assumption I think we can reasonably make.
I want to put on record that yesterday's guilty verdict only happened because hundreds, if not thousands, of dedicated public servants worked towards it.
No. What? He was there, he was caught there, he was arrested there, and they have absolute proof, and they found stuff in his home. Even if he hadn't done what he did, they found enough to incriminate him. What do you mean, hundreds of thousands of dedicated workers? I think the only dedicated workers were the ones who convinced him or his team to plead guilty. Look, plead guilty because we don't want it all to come out in court. That's what I think.
Many of whom endured absolutely harrowing circumstances.
Oh, it was terrible to go into the crime, I'm quite sure. He's saying that there. But that didn't need to happen at all, did it?
Particularly in the police and the Crown Prosecution Service. That is their job. They are brilliant at it.
Yeah, this is totally irrelevant.
But we should never forget their service to our country.
This is absolutely, totally irrelevant.
Law and order depend on them.
Oh, yeah, and so what about those policemen saying to that Jewish man in London, you're visibly Jewish and you're irritating all these angry Muslims there in the road? Law and order don't make me laugh.
And yet I'm under no illusions that until the wider state shows the country it can change.
Yeah, I wish it would. There's no change that I would want more than you and your idiot followers are out of government. That's the only change I can hope for.
Not just what it delivers for people, but also its culture. Then this atmosphere of mistrust.
The atmosphere of mistrust is coming about because the ordinary people of this country are being bullied into silence and compliance when they don't want to be bullied, and they mistrust our government because they can see it all coming from people like you, Sir Keir.
Will remain. So I want to be crystal clear in front of the British people.
You want to be crystal clear. You always want to be crystal clear. As a matter of fact, you are crystal clear, but not in the way I think you are. You are a hypocrite, Starmer. And that is crystal clear. Oh, here, he wants to be crystal clear. The next thing, leave no stone unturned. I mean, what did he get this speech out of? The big book of cliches?
Today, we will leave no stone unturned. I was the prosecutor who first spotted failures in grooming cases in my institution, the CPS, 14 years ago.
Yeah, and did nothing about it.
And I was the prosecutor who first did something about it.
Yeah, what?
By bringing the rape gangs in Rochdale to justice.
Yeah, that was when there had been a huge fuss about it in the papers when Andrew Norfolk started reporting on it, and a few other people. You had been in office since 2008, so far as I remember. Director of Public Prosecutions from 2008 to 2013.
In my institution, the CPS, 14 years ago. And I was the prosecutor who first did something about it by bringing the rape gangs in Rochdale to justice. And so my approach as Prime Minister will be no different.
OK, I'm just looking this up here. How did the grooming gang scandal unfold, it says here. This is from Sky. 2001. Names of taxi drivers who picked up girls from care homes in Rotherham. 2004, a Channel 4 documentary. 2010, 11 men are convicted of offences of sexual exploitation of children in Derbyshire. 2011, Andrew Norfolk starts receiving tip-offs about child sexual exploitation in Rotherham. 2011, a girl abused by a grooming gang in Huddersfield writes a letter to a judge. It was not until 2013 that another victim came forward. 2011, Operation Bullfinch is launched by the police and council in Oxford. This has still got nothing to do with Starmer. 2012, the first grooming gang's conviction. 2013, 7 men jailed. OK, so Starmer was in office for years before anything happened. And what did happen happened because of people like Andrew Norfolk. And he is taking credit for it now. So we're talking about a terrible crime that happened last year. And he's talking about his record in the prosecution service. Disgraceful.
Shortcomings are now holding back the ability of this country to keep its citizens and its children safe. I will find them and I will root them out. I remember when this happened, in those dark days of the summer. And I remember that, like now, the whole country grieved for Southport.
Not you. You were talking about far-right thugs to grieving people. People who grieve tend to, well, not be that polite. You had about as much sympathy for them as well as you're showing now, which is just a self-boosting exercise here.
But I also remember how it was profoundly moved by their example. Because even as that community faced an unimaginable evil, even as they had to endure mindless violence, bricks...
Oh, just a minute. Mindless violence, bricks and bottles thrown at their community. What? Whose community are you talking about here? And what about the time when you went to lay a wreath or something and somebody was shouting from the crowd about how badly that those people feel they've been treated, and you just cut and run, didn't you? What?
And bottles thrown at their community, their businesses, their mosque. Police officers attacked, including the...
Just a minute! He actually did it! The mosque!
By their example. Because even as that community faced...
That community, he's referring to the Muslims.
...an unimaginable evil. Even as they had to endure mindless violence. Bricks and bottles...
The Muslims! He's talking about the Muslims! How dare he!
...thrown at their community, their businesses, their mosque. Police officers attacked, including those who are on the scene responding to this vile murder. Even despite all of that, they chose to come together.
Now, who are you talking about now? Because you're talking about mosques, and now you're talking about the people coming together. And there were non-Muslims who were picking up the rubble afterwards, that's for sure. But who are you talking about here? He's making a speech here in which he's trying to sort of conflate some rioting that was bad with ordinary people who were sad and with Muslims who a few bottles were thrown into the mosque. As far as I know, the mosque wasn't torn down or anything. There were people who were acting badly. Let's leave them on one side, because what he did was he took the entire population of Southport, the white population, and called them far-right thugs. And now he's sort of mixing the mosque in with that.
They chose to pick up the pieces of their lives. They chose to rebuild, brick by brick. Side by side. Strangers no longer strangers.
Oh, for God's sake.
A community.
Oh.
This country...
Look, you know what? Diabetes runs in my mother's line. I'm getting a bit worried about this.
...has no shortage of empathy for the people of Southport. I know that. But in the face of such darkness and tragedy, what we really should do is follow their example. That is what we need to face.
Yeah, the example of the people you were all calling far-right thugs, or the example of the poor put-upon Muslims who had some bottles thrown at their mosque.
This new threat. But also something more. Because national renewal isn't just about public services or the economy. It's about turning us back towards ourselves, giving people confidence in a shared future.
Oh, you know, to quote Shakespeare, words, words, words. That's from Hamlet, by the way.
So people can once again see the strength and power in themselves and in this nation. But that can only begin today by holding up the mirror and facing what we see.
Hang on. You hold up the mirror, you see your own face. And?
So wherever this inquiry goes, we will follow it. No matter the boats it will rock, no matter the vested interests it will threaten.
Yeah, right. So long as they're not your vested interests, I'm quite sure.
We won't hide. But then, most importantly of all, we will act. Because this time it will be different.
Oh, yes. I bring up the wife beater thing again. You know, I won't do it next time. Sorry, I just lost my cool.
Southport will be a line in the sand.
Oh, there's the cliché again.
We will honour those 3 little girls.
Yeah, I wish you would.
And deliver not just justice, but the change that the people and families of Southport deserve. Thank you.
Well, that's it. A disgraceful exercise in hypocrisy, obfuscation, and emptiness. Just emptiness. And lies, I think. Okay, till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.